Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. We're so excited to have you all here today. We're just letting people jump in and just taking a few seconds. So go ahead and when you jump in, go ahead and share in the chat your name, your favorite quote, and your favorite quote from one of our films. The piece is "I Am" and "I Am Not Your Negro." Or if you weren't able to watch the films, you can share your favorite quote from Toni Morrison or James Baldwin. Again, thank you all for joining. We're so excited to have you, and we're letting folks join in and connect. Again, welcome, folks. We're so glad to have you all. Thanks for joining in. This is Black, Bold, and Brilliant. We're so excited to have you all. This is just an exciting event. We've got a great panel, and we're so excited to have you all joining us. We've got Betty Sawyer, we've got Karen Rodriguez, and Ashley Finley here to reflect on the film and share their thoughts. While you're all jumping on, we want to hear from you. In the chat, share your name and your favorite quote from one of the films. If you weren't able to see the films, go ahead and share your favorite quote from Toni Morrison or James Baldwin. So excited to have you all joining us. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Awesome. Welcome, folks. So as we have you all engaged, we'll have you follow the lead of the moderator. They're putting in some instructions, and we want this to be a safe and engaging space for everyone. So utilize the chat option and the question and answer option to share what's on your mind throughout the discussion, and we'll be able to fold in your comments into our conversation. As you're contributing to the conversation, we ask you to be in the moment and speak to what's shared, be curious and seek to connect with each other and stay kind. And now we'll have Billy Palmer come on and share our why and why this event was near and dear for us.
Hello, everybody. And thank you for coming. We are so glad to have everybody. I'm Billy Palmer. I am the co-host and associate producer for Radioactive on KRCL. And on Thursday nights, Frankie Baines, who you see here, or you'll see here later. Also, Asia Washington, who you'll also see a little bit later. Esther Moron-Yobaro and Malaysia Garfield on Thursday nights at 6 o'clock on Radioactive. We have a show called Changing the Narrative, and this is a little bit of that work, as well as some movement building that Frankie Baines and Esther Moron-Yobaro and myself began to cook up. And then also Frankie Baines herself created you'll see down in the sponsors, Utah Combos, which all of this is part of some work that we've been doing for quite some time on this notion of changing the narrative or finding ways that we can speak deeper about the things that we know and understand to be questionable, about those things that we don't feel quite right about, that we know we need to dig a little deeper about. So this is part of that, as well as some of the movement building we've been doing around a beloved community within our communities of activism. We want to create a world that is more healthy for all of us. And we felt that some of the things missing in our own communities here in Salt Lake City and throughout the Valley, we're missing a little bit of those healing elements. And we realized that as John Lewis says, your means and your ends are tied together. And so we need to find ways that our movements have healing within them. So that was one of the other motivations in doing this. And the other one was the political climate calls us all. Utah Film Center got a hold of many of the Black community here in Utah to say, we want to give our platform for whatever it is that you feel like you want to do. And so this is one of those things that we're doing on Utah Film Center's website, and we really want to thank them. Also want to thank KRCL, our other sponsor, where I work. I have to, of course, disclose, but also for being able to, or being willing to have these conversations that some people might find uncomfortable. We hope that you do find yourself uncomfortable. We also hope that you find yourself inspired and feeling like this is something that you've wished you could talk about for a long, long time. And so we've decided that we're going to center Black voices tonight as we see this climate change, as we see this world changing towards a world that is more and more embracing Blackness and allowing for Black people to speak more from their center, more from their experiences in this world. And we want to engage you tonight. We want you to be thinking about something. What does the world look like? What does a world that embraces anti-Blackness look like? So as you're watching our films and you're listening to our panel, we're hoping that you will, in a sense, ask yourself that question and leave that before the end of the night in the chat. So maybe you don't have an idea of what you want to say right now, but we are engaging with every single one of our audience in that respect to imagine a world that embraces anti-Blackness. As we discuss Blackness in this, maybe we'll get some more ideas. So that is the why of this, and we are so grateful for you being here. Frankie.
Awesome. Thanks so much for just sharing that thoughtfulness, sharing just the spirit of John Lewis's work and how that intertwines into our work, and how we're looking to connect that means and ends that has that vision of embracing Blackness and lifting it up. And I'm looking forward to hearing how we'll envision getting there. I'm super excited to open this up and kind of set the tone. We're going to have an amazing poet, a wonderful friend of mine. Her name is Michelda George. She's a South Floridian poet with Haitian roots. Her poetry inspires others to live to their fullest. She works hard to build her community in other ways. Also, she teaches financial literacy and has some incredible inspirational projects underway. Michelda, we're so excited to have you here, and we look forward to hearing your poem.
Thank you, Frankie, so much for the introduction and having me here tonight. I'm really excited to share this new piece with this audience, with myself, because this is the first time that I am sharing this piece. So I'm a little nervous. My hands are shaking right now. But outside of what I do professionally, I consider myself to be a creative, and this is the one thing that I'm really sensitive about, I guess. So I hope you guys like it. The title of this poem is called I Didn't Know I Was Black. I didn't know I was Black. Oh, sorry, I mean African American. No, a colored person, a Negro. Oh, wait, a person of color. Let's be politically correct here. Either way, I didn't know I was Black because a little girl told me that I wasn't. To her, I was Haitian. Although she looked just like me, roots just as nappy, she screamed, "Girl, you ain't Black," with no hesitation. Her vision was very clear with no distortion. When asked, "What language is that?" my answer was never English to that question. Michelda, what kind of name is that? In my mind, I asked her, "Are you for real? Quanisha Alize Richards?" Anyways, why do you wear all those barrettes or bows in your hair? It's school, not church. Why are you wearing church shoes with those flip down ruffled socks? Go back to your country on your banana boat and play with those sticks and rocks. I mean, let's be serious. Y'all don't even have a McDonald's. Well, damn, I felt fraudulent. I was born in the United States from parents who were immigrants from Haiti. You know, about the Haitian Revolution in 1804, that Haiti. The same country known as the first and only Black republic in the world. You know, that Haiti. In other words, the country Quanisha Alizé Richards told me to go back to on my banana boat to enjoy the days on the beautiful countryside where my parents had a home, to play with sticks and rocks, versus the drug-infested, violent, highly sexualized community known as the Block. The audacity of her. To look at another little Black girl and tell her she doesn't belong. After centuries of oppression and discrimination, ignorant to the fact that outside of our bubble, when we both walked into a room, the majority, AKA the white folk, would see us both as Black. Looking back, I highly doubt while we were standing on a playground, either one of us knew what things we were both going to be subject to. But today, thee lift me and I'll lift thee, and we shall ascend together. I support Black everything, no matter what climate of the world, no matter what type of weather, no matter what culture, nationality, or sexual orientation. I will fight for economic equality, for reparations, for defunding, abolishing all forms of discrimination. I'm gonna fight for my sister's 40 acre and a mule, because when she wins, I win. Let's create the new exception to the rule.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. All right. I'm super excited to share, get this sharing going. Okay, awesome. I'm super excited to have Asia Washington and Billy Palmer introduce our panel. And we'll start with Betty Sawyer.
So, Betty Sawyer is the president of, before we get going, we're going to play you some clips, and you're going to hear some reflections on those clips from the two movies tonight, from I Am Not Your Negro and The Pieces That I Am, the documentary about Toni Morrison. Our first panelist is Betty Sawyer, and she is the president of the Ogden branch NAACP, co-founder and director of Project Success Coalition, and community engagement coordinator in Access and AMP. Oh, give me 1 second here. Diversity at Weber State University, and charter member of the Greater Salt Lake Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Betty is a coordinator and builder and has been an agent for change in Salt Lake City, in the city of Ogden and Utah for over 40 years. Her work and advocacy stand today with the creation of the state's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Human Rights Coalition while serving as director of the Office of Black Affairs. Betty's work with the Project Success includes the Harmby Tobacco and Health Network, the Utah Juneteenth Freedom and Heritage Festival and Holiday, and the Utah Black Roundtable. These initiatives demonstrate the value she sees in equity, diversity, and inclusion at all levels. Asia?
Hello. I haven't had a chance to introduce myself. I'm Asia Washington. I am a community member here in Salt Lake City. I am a social worker who works in the city, and I am a co-host on KRCL's show, Changing the Narrative, which airs on Thursday nights. I'm so happy to be here and so happy to be able to introduce my dear friends on the panel. So I'm going to start off with Ashley Finley. Ashley is a California native who is currently living on the land of the Ute, Goshute, Paiute, and Northwestern Shoshone peoples, aka Salt Lake City. She is a Black woman, a daughter, a sister, an auntie, a friend, a dog mom, a nature lover, a birth keeper, a medicine maker, a poet, an activist, and an educator. Her passion lies in the liberation of all colonized and oppressed people and in the facilitating of a return to sacred ancestral knowledge that bloomed before colonization and capitalism. I'm so happy you're here, Ashley. I can't wait to get into this discussion with you. And last but certainly not least is my friend Karen Rodriguez. Karen is the founder and CEO of Code in Color, an organization focused on creating innovative pathways for Black and Brown young adults to gain access to high-quality tech education and job opportunities. She's an expert in helping organizations improve their company cultures and create more equitable opportunities for diverse employees. Rodriguez, a former lobbyist and current marketing director at Utah Black Chamber, grew up in New York City and has worked on statewide and national anti-poverty, healthcare, and immigration policies before founding Code in Color. A recap of her life story can be watched in Netflix's show, The Kindness Diaries. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining us on this panel. I'm excited to get into this conversation.
And so we'll now turn our attention to the films, and so we can begin to get into our discussion. So the first clip is going to be, the first two clips you're going to hear are going to be from the James Baldwin documentary, I Am Not Your Negro, and I turn it over to Utah Film Center's Davey Davis.
And there are days, this is one of them, when you wonder what your role is in this country and what your future is in it. How precisely you're going to reconcile yourself to your situation here, and how you're going to communicate to the vast, heedless, unthinking, cruel white majority that you are here. I'm terrified at the moral apathy, the death of the heart, which is happening in my country. These people have deluded themselves for so long that they really don't think I'm human. I base this on their conduct, not on what they say. And this means that they have become, in themselves, moral monsters.
And so we are going to start out our panel conversation, and Asia Washington has the first question.
Yes, we decided to start off kind of heavy for this discussion. Hopefully we'll end on a lighter note. But from the clip, you can see Baldwin seems to be in a really reflective and maybe even a low point as he is talking about white America, taking it at face value, and explaining what the death of the heart looks like and how white America has become moral monsters that exist in this country. And I would say that Baldwin also posits himself as a documentarian of human nature. That's the role he selected for himself in the movement, so to speak. And along with that, he believed that white people weren't born racist, but became deluded in their thinking about non-whites. So my question to the panel, and maybe we can start off with Betty, would be, how do you see this moral apathy manifest itself in our country today? And maybe what can we do to challenge these delusions that diminish Black humanity?
That's a great question. I think as all of us have entered this space and around all of the heightened awareness and involvement, I think one of the things when I think about Baldwin's perspective was this notion of color blindness, that for white America is something that they were taught to not see us, to not recognize us, and even the issues around race itself, not to even talk about it and acknowledge it. And so when you're able to live void of that reality, it does create a sense of apathy. Unlike us, that's our lived truth. That's who we are. It's nothing that we can escape, nothing that every space we enter into, we recognize that we are Black, unapologetically Black. And so we get to face it. And one of the startling things I see even now is I'm running into people every day, and I'm sure you're seeing this across the board. They're acting like this is the first time they saw any of the injustices that are taking place. It's like, where have you been? We've been working together, walking together, doing all of these things, but it hasn't registered in them that racism is real, it exists, and it permeates every social structure of our society. And so I think that helps tell us where they are and how much more work that has to be done in this space. Thank you.
Absolutely. Karen or Ashley, do you have thoughts on what we can do maybe to challenge these delusions that diminish Black humanity, and then also how you see this moral apathy manifests in our country today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big concern, I grew up in New York City, so I kind of lived in this existence around Black and brown folk all the time. We tend to engage in conversation about what was happening because it was a part of what we were living on an everyday basis. And when I moved to Utah, the conversation, right, was the conversation shifted because a lot of people were not in the know of Black and brown issues, because to them, right, for some people, I was the first Black person they ever even met. And so, that's not to say that there's not a lack, that people shouldn't be educated. It's just that perhaps the education on Black and brown issues, Black and brown history, to be able to make a more well-rounded and educated approach when you meet a new person instead of go by prejudices just wasn't there. It's not instilled in our education system in Utah. And I think that's what contributes to a lot of that moral apathy that we're seeing, right? People can't see you as human if they can't identify with your story. And they can't identify with your story and humanize you if they don't even know of your existence and they're not taught about your history.
Yeah, I think we have a really, Utah itself is really interesting in the fact that, there aren't these large sections of the state or like large cities, right, where white people are the minority, right? Like here we're stuck in, am I on mute? Okay, no. Okay, sorry. Here we're kind of stuck in this position where white folks are the majority everywhere you go, right? And so I like kind of what Karen was saying and what Miss Betty was saying as well, that there's kind of like a cognitive dissonance that happens, right? Because especially in a place like Utah, where the state is kind of touted as this pious, peaceful, kind state, so like, and that's the image that is portrayed of Utah, right? And so for anything to kind of go against that, it just like the majority cannot accept that. And so we come to this place of cognitive dissonance, right? Where we end up seeing that because folks are not used to being in regular and close proximity with marginalized people, right? Black, Indigenous, people of color, there is a dehumanization. And I want to say that it's not intentional, but also part of me believes that it is, right? Because you can't have Salt Lake City, this is the place, Salt Lake City, the holy grail for this religion and this place of peace, and yet still have, Black and brown people getting murdered in your backyard, right? Those two things don't go together, and those two things don't sync with each other. And so I think that the conversation, one thing that angers me about this, and I resonate here with Baldwin and kind of the energy he's putting off, but one thing that frustrates me is that then when, like, I call it the Great White Awakening, when the Great White Awakening starts to happen, then the conversation doesn't become necessarily about the humanity of Black people or like the wrongs that are being done to Black people. It becomes about whether or not Black people deserve to live, right? And we see that conversation revolving around, the George Floyd murder. Well, yeah, that was like terrible, but he also had a rap sheet. He also did this, and in the past he's been arrested for these things, and he wasn't a perfect guy. He wasn't, he wasn't a leader in the community, right? So that's where I see the moral apathy happening, even in a time like this, where there's a rising up of people from all different walks of life saying like Black Lives Matter, but I still see this conversation revolving around which Black lives are allowed to matter, right? So George Floyd's life mattered just as much as Representative John Lewis's life mattered, and so we get into these cycles where we start discussing which Black lives deserve to exist. And so I think that's a conversation in some ways that has been happening since the inception of America. Yeah.
Really appreciate those comments. Karen, I saw you, shaking your head up and down a lot and resonating with that. And I just wanted to make sure before we go to the next clip, if you had anything that you wanted to reflect there, or Betty as well. I wasn't able to see you on the screen, but Karen, I definitely saw you sort of animated there. So I wanted to give you the opportunity if you still wanted to say anything else.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just agree with Ashley, right? There's the notion that the conversation is then shifted to what life deserves to live. I think in addition to that, the conversation then becomes, okay, let's not talk about the rights and the lack of rights that Black people have, but also, can we talk about white guilt and the need for white education, right? Bringing it back, it becomes a cycle that it's a me approach for a lot of other folks, where it's like, hey, yes, we recognize that you want to talk about this, but the focus shouldn't be for people who are currently hurting to then, instead of figure out policies to ensure their livelihood, that we then focus on your education so that you feel validated and you feel like you're a good member of society. So I just wanted to make sure that we add that in, because that also plays to the dehumanization aspect of an individual. You're essentially erasing what is happening to them when you make the focus about yourself and your need to really educate yourself right now by that person or by those groups of people.
I love what I'm hearing, because we're going to sort of get into some of that, talking more about the humanity of folks than just the policy. We know that the policy affects folks and the humanity sometimes gets lost in the policy, but we have had this humanity problem for a long, long time. So thank you for that. We're going to go into another clip, and it's going to be another one from the movie I Am Not Your Negro. Take it away, Davey.
I don't know what most white people in this country feel, but I can only include what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white, and a Christian church which is black. I know, as Malcolm X once put it, it's the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. That says a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means that I can't afford to trust most white Christians, and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks they give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
So in this clip, the premise of the question is what I kind of wanted, that kind of struck me. The premise of this question, it comes from that of discomfort. The gentleman is asking him, and I think it probably sounds familiar to all of us. When we talk about race, he talks about from a place of discomfort. Well, why talk about race? Why do you want to bring it to race? Why would you want to talk about race so much? When we talk about race in the context of blackness, it creates tension, and yet anti-Semitism, we're allowed to talk about. It's polite conversation. It's okay. Xenophobia in the context of race is somewhat, we're capable of talking about it as a community. Religious bigotry delves into the racism of that, and we talk about that. We're able to talk about that a little more. We talk about racism in context of immigration, but when we talk about Black issues, it's, whoa, hit the brakes. That's not polite conversation. That's not what we talk about at the dinner table. So when we talk about racism in the context of Blackness, we often hear that word uncomfortable. We refer to it as the uncomfortable conversation. And yet Black people talk about race and racism often. We talk about it practically every day. So if we're being really honest about it, we're as Black people actually pretty comfortable with talking about it. Where in this clip, Baldwin talks very boldly, unapologetically, no code switching whatsoever, just sort of matter-of-factly. And we think, man, I wish I could talk about it that way, where I could talk from my experiences, where I could speak from my place of power, and not have to be reminded that it's not polite conversation. So I wanted to ask you about that notion of, does it feel like being expected to mute yourself, talk about yourself in a different way that makes it more comfortable for other people to understand it or hear it, even if it comes from your own experiences, to talk about your family, your history, where you're coming from? Do you feel like that, in a sense, is somewhat limiting your conversation, is also limiting you? And I wanted to get your reflections on that. And I think maybe let's start with Ashley on this one.
So what I hear, kind of like what you're talking about, is what we call the white gaze, right? And it's something I'm extremely familiar with, right? Like growing up, going to private school, then later transferring to a predominantly white high school. I'm extremely familiar with this idea of censorship or muting my Blackness in order to not make white people uncomfortable. Because as we know, as I'm sure many of the Black women on this panel know, making white people uncomfortable is dangerous, right? It can be dangerous for us. And so I used to have a lot of experience with that, but I will say that now, in my 30s, I no longer censor myself, because also on the flip side of that, the silence is dangerous as well. Like, I forgot who it was, but she said, white people will kill you and say it's your fault if you are silent. I'm paraphrasing the quote. I think I missed a couple of words there. But essentially, like, if you are silent, white folks will kill you and say it's your fault. And so I think that that's something that I've really come to realize. Like, I didn't grow up in a silently Black home, right? I went to school and I thought, oh, maybe it's a lot better just not to like kind of ruffle feathers here. I went to university and started to kind of think the same thing. But at home, my mom was always outspoken. She was always super pro-Black. I grew up reading Morrison and Baldwin, and I was immersed in what it meant to be Black, what it meant to say it out loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, what it meant, and like the power it holds to be able to say, like, I am Black, and despite of, I have a poem that says, like, we laugh and we dance in spite of the noose, right? Like, in spite of the danger outside, and in spite of the danger in all of these systems and all of these places and environments, like, I am proudly Black and I am resiliently Black. And so these days, I feel like it is my duty to honor the work of my mother, of the people in our community, like the one that I'm here, like Miss Betty Sawyer, who have come before in these spaces and who have done this very difficult work. I feel like it is my duty to not shy away from the truth of Blackness, in a Western world, right? In a colonized world. And that truth is not easy. Like what you say, it's not polite. It's not polite. It's not polite for cops to be killing Black people for just trying to buy Skittles. Like, it's not polite. You're right. You know? And so I think that the onus has to be put on the white supremacist structures to feel uncomfortable and to get like, to really face the horror that this country has imposed on marginalized people. And it should be taken off of those of us on the margins, or those of us living under the kind of whip of colonization, to assuage the fears of white America.
Thank you, Ashley. Let's go with Betty on this one, and then we'll go with Karen afterwards.
Thank you. This is something, and Ashley, right on. You know, we're expected to carry the water continually for other people, and be accountable for their guilt, be accountable for their denial. And this is something that historically, because it was a matter of life and death, we had to do. We were forced to do that. But the time has come again, and I applaud all of the younger voices that are at the table, not just here, but all over, because it's time for us to be unapologetically Black. We've done it in phases and retreat. We push and we pull and come back. But we recognize that us shrinking so that somebody else can be great or feel good about themselves does not do us any good. Matter of fact, it's kept us where we are. Just recently, in a conversation with the governor, I had the opportunity to share a Utah Black agenda that some of us worked on in 1991, and we did another one in 2016. They're the same. And that's what happened. We don't stand up and own ourselves and stand in our rightful place. And one of my mentors always told me, H.C. Massey, that watch what a person does and not what they say. And so I've had to use that throughout my life in these polite conversations. I'm going to be polite, but I'm going to challenge you, because what you're doing and not doing is affecting my family, my community, and it's doing it for generations to come. And so we can't be the ones right now at this time, no more. We have to draw that line in the sand and tell folks to put on your big girl panties, your big guy panties, and be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's what time it is right now. You're going to have to learn the same way we had to learn. And it comes with some hurt, it comes with some pain, but we deal with cultural pain every day. Every day. We can't escape that. And for you to think that you can get out of this space unhurt, unblemished, not hardly. So get ready, do the reading, do the work, and let's be about that business, because the time is over for us, again, to carry you, to hold you, to shield you. Our ancestor did that. We fed your children. We cooked and we did all of that. We're not doing that right now. That time is over. And it's about the work, because it is life and death. And I don't want to see my grandkids having to deal with the same foolishness that I've had to deal with, my mother had to deal with. So, in the honor of our ancestors, the time has come for us to be bold and brilliant and all the way unapologetically Black, to move this agenda from where it is to where we know it needs to go. And our white brothers and brown brothers and everybody else and sisters, you need to come on this ride, because you're dealing with some of the same stuff, and you're in denial about where you are. And we've been the ones to lead this historically. All the civil rights changes and movements have been on the backs of us. And now it's time for everybody else to join us in moving forward.
Whew. I was about to get up and march, and I wasn't even sure I was marching to.
Right.
I wasn't even sure where I was going to march to. I was like, I'm ready. So now, Karen.
That's a really great closer, Billy. I don't know that
Well, you got plenty.
Betty and Ashley hit it right on the head. I'll give you a little bit of a different approach, right? When it comes to corporations, outside of communities, right? I think a reason as to why it is a little bit easier to have the conversation about, anti-Semitism or xenophobia or religious bigotry is because of its proximity to whiteness, right? There's this idea that I could come from a different country and face some backlash like the Irish did, and I can comprehend that, right? Because I see a white case, right? There's this, the same thing goes with pride issues, right? LGBTQ plus issues are applicable within the white community. And so there's this understanding that is something that it's urgent. We need to fix it because it affects us, right? When it comes to Blackness, it's different. And the reason it's different is because if you're white or if you're of a different race or ethnicity, you can't comprehend it. It's not your lived experience. In corporate spaces, everybody, a lot of these corporate spaces, I work with a lot of tech companies, and the majority they're predominantly white. So when you think about the structure of how the policies are written, whether that's for hiring, keeping people on, promotions, sponsorship or mentorship pathways, even referrals, they're looking for people that look like them. And they're looking for people that look like them because they understand their history. They have a certain correlation, right? They can fight for that person. And I think wholeheartedly, I believe that that's a big reason as to why we see the lack of Black people within corporate spaces. So they don't want to have the conversation because it's uncomfortable, right? There's not that proximity to whiteness. I cannot understand it. Like Betty and Ashley were saying, we need to have the conversation. I'm a little bit different from Ashley. I totally resonated when you said, Ashley, that you had to find a way to find your voice because it was time to speak up. And actually, that was the approach that my dad gave me. He had to find his way to have his voice. My mom, on the other hand, I tell it like it is. She was the Black sheep in her family. And consequently, I'm the same way. I've probably since the age of 3, according to my mom, have never shied away from telling people, hey, I don't like that. Hey, that's not okay. Hey, that's not polite. And I'm going to tell you why that's not polite. Michelda earlier, she, in her poem, she read, she's from Haiti. My family's from Dominican Republic. And there are some really big frictions between both of those countries that live on the same island. So you can imagine a Black Dominican girl owning her Blackness was pretty hard for my family to understand. But I knew it was imperative for me to speak on that, because if I did not do that, if I did not own my Blackness, if I did not own that we are all from the same place, that we have the same ancestors, that our ancestors came there as slaves. I mean, my great-grandfather was quite literally in a plantation, okay, and was freed in 1915 in Dominican Republic. So when I think and I talk about these stories, I know that it is my duty to talk about them. It is my duty to be very, very Black and very outspokenly Black, and especially and particularly focused on corporate spaces so that other people can come in and be able to thrive like me.
And you started out with not wanting to follow Betty Sawyer. Okay. That was brilliant and bold and beautiful. That's all I have to say about that. So Asia, do you want to introduce this next clip?
I'd like to say something before we go to the next clip, and I really appreciate all of your perspectives on this. Definitely speaking our truth about our experiences is going to continue to be a huge piece in our liberation. But one of the things that came up for me from this Baldwin clip is that we're recognizing that Black people in this country have been gaslighted. We've been told that despite all of our experiences and historical records, that what we're experiencing isn't real, that it's not the truth, that we're making it up, that we're crazy. And every day that we leave our house, we have to push up against these notions that what we're experiencing isn't the truth. And I feel like that's just going to be such a huge part as we go forward in the age of Black Lives Matter, to understand the tactics that like white supremacy will use against us. And a lot of times that's the gaslighting that keeps us from even recognizing that our experiences are real. Did you want to say something, Ashley?
I did. I just wanted to say yes. That is like the perfect term for it, right? And I also wanted to say, I think Miss Betty kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, that like not only have we been gaslighted to like believe that our experiences are just like made up non-fairy tales, because like there's nothing super romantic about anti-Blackness, right? But like we've also been gaslighted on the other side of that to say that like respectability is what's going to get us free, right? Like if we tie our ties right, or if we just go to the right college, or if we eat these things instead of those things, or if we speak with this dialect instead of that one, like that's going to be the thing to get you free. Like, you know, like that's going to be the way like the nice Negro becomes liberated, right? And so I definitely love what you're saying, because that is the perfect term, and everybody can kind of identify with what gaslighting is, right? But like as a whole across like in this country and in others, right, Black people have been gaslighted to believe both of those things, you know, to the point where we have, going back to kind of like Billy's point or Billy's question, like we have internalized it so much to the point where sometimes Black people feel uncomfortable talking about it, right? Like Black people say, oh, I don't want to talk about that. That's a passer. I'm tired of seeing these movies with these narratives, or I don't want to read that book. You know, like it is a point of pain, but also it's like, you know, like, anyways, yeah, that's my point. Thank you, Asia, is really what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
But I think that's a part of that, you know, that double-mindedness, that two worlds that we have to live in all the time, policing ourselves, and not just policing ourselves. We have to unlearn all of that stuff, misinformation too. I tell folk all the time, what school do you think I went to? The same one you did. If you didn't learn it, I didn't learn it at the school. But fortunately, I came up with my parents teaching me this history, my history, making me feel great about myself. And then when I started reading for myself. So when they try to create a narrative, I said, oh no, That's not working at all. And it was for me to pass that on to my sons to let them know, oh no, you stand up and own it. So any report, any work that they had to do at school, it was about a Black person. They can do all them other people in their reports and things, but whatever you do, you're going to be educating everybody else. You know, I bought them colored crayons. Ain't nobody yellow that you know, ain't no white. You know, you can have shades of brown and black, but that's not working up in here. And so, you know, we have so much because we believed it. And that's what they, you know, they knew that. If we tell them enough lies, if we tell somebody often enough, and somebody's a social worker on the line, that we will internalize and believe that those lies. And so we bought in a lot of lies over these 400 years that we had to tear that off and rip it out and replace it with real information, and factual information. And that's a part of the work that we're doing now. And hopefully we'll continue to move forward, that we won't accept those false narratives.
Powerful. All I can do is snap my fingers right now. So this notion is going to continue on. We're going to go on to our next clip, and this is going to be from The Pieces I Am, the Toni Morrison documentary. And I believe it will carry on to what we've already been talking about. So if we could go into that clip, Davey.
I remember an incident from my own childhood when a very close friend of mine and we were walking down the street. We were discussing whether God existed. And she said he did not. And I said he did. But then she said she had proof. She said, I have been praying for 2 years for blue eyes, and he never gave me any. So I just remember turning around and looking at her. She was very, very Black, and she was very, 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 very beautiful. How painful. Can you imagine that kind of pain? About color. So I wanted to say, you know, this kind of racism hurts. This is not lynchings and murders and drownings. This is interior pain. So deep for an 11-year-old girl to believe that if she only had some characteristic of the white world, she would be okay.
All right. I don't know how many of you out there or even our panelists have read The Bluest Eye. It's an excellent, excellent book that just talks about so much. And I feel like that story resonates with me so much because I think myself and so many of us out there have struggled with internalized racism. And it is painful. It's painful to feel that everything about you, dare I say, your essence as a Black person is wrong, that it needs to be fixed, that it needs to be in proximity to whiteness, as we talked about before. And it continues, that can be something that's a lifelong struggle. And I know it is for me and for a lot of people out there. And I feel like a lot of that comes up again, living in Utah and not seeing reflections of myself in my community or finding very few reflections of myself in this community. And it's been a long journey to appreciate my features, but I think I come at it from a notion that these are my ancestors' features. And it's something that I will not be ashamed about because they were given to me, it's passed down to me, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So I'm wondering if, and maybe Karen, we can start with you, just reflecting on this clip, maybe about your own experiences with internalized racism, how you've worked with that, and maybe how we can push back against these notions in the Black community.
Sure thing. I actually wrote this note. It's really interesting. So I mentioned earlier that my great-grandfather, was freed from a plantation in 1915 in the Dominican Republic. And when essentially the story is that my great-grandfather, who used to work for my great-grandmother's parents, they fell in love, and she said, forget you, to her family, and married this Black guy. And this is a Spanish, her whole family is Spanish. They are very adamant that they are not going to mix their blood with a Black person. And she defied that notion because she was in love with my abuelo Joaquin. And growing up, I'm going to go back to this. So growing up, I really genuinely despised my hair. I wanted to have straight hair, like maybe a little bit of waviness in it. Dominican culture, you straighten your hair, again, because of that proximity to whiteness. We have that here as well in the United States, but in DR, this is ugly. This is, why would you do this, right? And it took me a couple of years. It took me until my dad had a very blatant and open conversation where he said, why do you do that? Do you realize that, one, it looks fried and ugly when it's straight? And two, let me tell you a little bit about your family history. And he shared that story with me. I always want to cry, so I'm sorry. But what I'm trying to go at with that story is that was a moment in which I realized, if my great-grandmother found beauty in my great-grandfather, so much beauty in this ebony, gorgeous, radiant man, that she was willing to leave her whole family behind because she found him beautiful and she fell in love with him. Why would I hate the very features that are akin of my history and where I come from? So ever since having that conversation with my dad, that just like was not an option for me. You know, I'm very protective of my identity. I'm very embracing of my identity because there is so much beauty and so much pain that came with that for me to do that would really be kind of like an FU to two beautiful people and one really brave woman who said, I am willing to leave everything behind and fight for, you know, Black unity and even Black revolution and Black life in Dominican Republic. She taught that to everybody in our family. I do that all the time. I do it at work. I don't care if people don't like it. I don't care if my identity seems strange to you, if my voice seems strange to you, if it offends you. I really genuinely don't care. Because I'm beautiful and I'm going to look like this. And and to be completely frank, I also don't want to have to like dress it up to make other people feel happy and comfortable when they see me. I'm not willing to jeopardize my identity for other people. So that's my story.
Thank you for that. That is so powerful. It's kind of like this idea that the personal is political, that just the way that we show up naturally is a political statement when it's just the way that we show up in the world. So I'd like to throw it to Ashley or Betty to just kind of talk about maybe your own journey and maybe how we can push back against these notions.
For me, I was fortunate enough to be raised, I'm from Maryland. And so my elementary experience was in a segregated elementary school. I lived in a segregated community. I had all Black teachers and a principal. And so I started with a strong foundation of who I was. Then I was one of 10 students that was selected to integrate our all-white high school going into the 7th grade. And my initial thought when my parents said, agreed to do this, I felt betrayed. It's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go there. I don't want to be around those people. I want to follow in my siblings' footsteps. I'm the youngest of 6 children. I grew up going to their high school, watching their sports team, watching my sisters and brothers in the drama club, the glee club, and I was just ready for that experience. But life had something else in store for me. And so when I was put in that space with 10 Black kids and 300 white students, I was angry. I fought. I did whatever I needed to do to hold my space. And I got to the point, because I'm from a Christian home. I identify as a Christian. So the whole time I was being angry and wanting to beat everybody up, my mother is on her knees praying, Lord, help this child. She can't fight her whole life. And so my experiences there, I was able to connect with a couple of white people. You know, I said, okay, well, maybe all white people aren't bad. And so then I had another experience of like, I don't know. They're kind of slick, you know, you can't just trust them 100%. So my early journey was just trying to figure out how I was to react and interact with these people that I knew didn't value me as a human being, didn't value me for what I brought to the table. And so a lot of my experiences in high school kept me in my radical mode. You know, no, we fighting to the finish. And then I go to a HBCU, again, surrounded by Black folk. I had scholarships to go to predominantly white institutions. It's like, I don't think so. They could give me all the money in the world. I'll get a job, 2 jobs. I'm through with that experience. And so I got refueled at Morgan State University, only to end up in Utah. And it's like, what in the world is going on here? You know, Lord, why do you have me here? And so a part of that, I realized, you know, he prepared me to not to turn my anger into, you know, action. How can I fight in a different way to bring about those changes that I thought needed to take place? And so I run across so many young women and men who have struggled with their identity in Utah. It's real, and they've gone through a lot of pain. I had a student at Weber who is biracial, and her entering college was the first time that she even began to embrace her Blackness. And my first thought was, how could that be? You know, looking in the mirror and all of that. But this is a whole nother experience. And we haven't really prepared our children to embrace who they are, feel comfortable with that. And a lot of that has to do with the education system, what's going on in the home. In a recent meeting with the governor and the Martin Luther King Commission and those folk a couple of weeks ago, whenever I go in those spaces, I have an ask. I don't need to just meet with you to be meeting with you. You know, what can you do? And my ask was our curriculum. We need to stop lying to folk and change their curriculum and make it inclusive and telling the truth. And so his education director was there, and that's our work. We had to challenge them, one, to get on that, so our kids can see a real history. They can see themselves in the books and not just all white people and everybody else, and learn the real history, because even our textbooks still have bad information, misinformation. And so we've had to continue to deal with the miseducation of our kids. And we have so many people being in Utah and in my family who are biracial. So how do we prepare our kids, my grandchildren, to be okay with who they are and not feel that they have to, again, not be okay with straight hair or whether it's curly or full lips and nose and all of that image. And all of us have to be a part of making each other being comfortable and elevating each other, because a part of that whole slave mentality was to put each other down, was to find that one thing wrong with a person versus looking for all of the beauty that's in that person. And so that's my challenge to us and everybody that's listening. We have to own this space to build each other up, to let everybody know you're okay. We're all different. Praise God, we're different, and that's a part of the beauty, but nobody's any better than anybody else. And so how can we embrace that and pass that on is what we have to continually work on, because it's real, it's painful. To not like a part of yourself, to not be willing to embrace yourself is something that no one should have to go through. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen and Miss Betty, for sharing that experience. I will say, like I mentioned earlier, my home was very pro-Black, right? And my mother, I'm an adopted child. My mother is 79 years old. So she grew up in a Jim Crow South. She came from a family of sharecroppers. Just her grandfather was born into slavery. And so I never, like the bluest eye, I resonate with it on kind of like a different level, right? I don't necessarily resonate with it because there was ever a point in my life where I was like, oh God, like I just wish I had this white feature, or I wish I had this proximity to whiteness in how I look or how I'm presented. And it was more so, there were moments when I feel like white people tried to make me feel really ashamed, and that made me really angry. Like white people tried to tell me I was ugly, or like the white systems tried to tell me that I was ugly, and that made me really angry. Or I saw people like cousins and stuff who would shame like the babies, shame the younger cousins for having not good hair or getting darker in the summer. And that made me really angry, because I am blessed enough to have always known that I'm beautiful, right? Like I have never had a point in my life, or if I did, I will say that, because we all have like, I feel like self-esteem issues in adolescence. It was never because of my Blackness, okay? Like I grew up very in tune with the fact that my Blackness is what made me beautiful. Like these cheekbones is what like made me look amazing, you know. And then I learned about the Tinyon laws, right? Which were these laws put in place. Like in America, there was literally a period of time where Black women were not allowed to have their hair out. They were forced to cover their hair because their hair was so desired and so beautiful by white folks and white slave owners that they became envious and passed legislation that said a Black woman could not be outside with her hair in all its glory. So I knew that I was a threat. I knew that my hair was a threat. I get frustrated with it, yes, because it is big and it is loud and it doesn't let anybody not know that I'm there, right? Sometimes I get frustrated with it. When you spend 2 hours detangling, girl, your arms get tired, right? But it's not because of my Blackness. I embrace it. Like, whose hair does this, right? Whose cheekbones sit like this? Whose skin like has this range? You know what I mean? Like mine. And I think that is glorious. And I was also affirmed in my home. I was affirmed. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't hear affirmations from my mothers, from my uncles, from my grandmother, from my aunties, telling me how valuable and how beautiful of a little Black girl I was. And so I'm really, really grateful, and I'm really, really lucky. I thank God every single day for that experience, because when I did go out into the world and I maybe code switched, right? It was never necessarily because I wanted this proximity to whiteness. Again, it was because I knew that going to a predominantly white school, like I was unsafe in all of my Blackness. So it was never out of shame. It was more so out of safety. And it was I never had a moment where I thought that I was less than because I was Black. I thought that I was unsafe because I was Black. And I knew that I wasn't accepted in many spaces because I was Black. And I knew that that could be dangerous for me as a Black person, but it was never out of anti-Blackness or hatred to myself. And I'm really, really blessed to have that experience. And I want to cultivate a world like Miss Betty was talking about and like Karen was talking about, and even like Michelda was talking about, where we uplift each other so much, right? Like where Black babies are uplifted so much that like there can be nothing else, right? There can be no shame in Blackness. Anti-Blackness cannot flourish because we know who we are and we know how brilliant and gorgeous and beautiful and valuable we are. And so that's the work that I do. And I just, that's why I'm here on this panel to say these things and to like just live in reverence of those people who had that beauty and who were forced to cover it up, you know? Like we can't let that happen. This is 2020. No, like we make the trends. You see, they out here trying to follow us. We make those trends. Now we just got to get credit for those trends.
Right. So many things are borrowed from Black culture, American Black culture specifically, even, or the Black culture of the Americas, all throughout. And we just want people to be pro-Black too, right? If you're going to borrow so much from the culture for centuries, you know, blues, jazz, country, hip hop, all of that stuff, if you're going to borrow from it, then one, give credit, and two, embrace it. Embrace it. You're experiencing Blackness and recognize it for that, right? So here I go, being on a panel all of a sudden. So this last piece here, we're going to play two more clips, and we're going to get into some of the conversations. You know, Ashley, I have to accuse you of like jumping ahead with everything here. So we're going to jump into some of the things that you've all kind of reflected on. So I think it's going to come in really nicely. And this is really, it's about that notion of the gaze. And I really love these two clips. And so we're going to be happy to do that. But the other one, she's reflecting on one of her most prolific books and one of the most emotionally charged books, Beloved. So Davey, go ahead and take it away.
My world is a Black world. She was doing something that a lot of Black writers who had come up in the 70s weren't doing, which was to write about the stories without having to talk about excising whiteness. And she didn't do it in a way that was about saying that the white world was wrong. The white world was just peripheral if it existed at all.
I didn't want to speak for Black people. I wanted to speak to and to be among. It's us. So the first thing I had to do was to eliminate the white gaze. Jimmy Baldwin used to talk about that. The little white man that sits on your shoulder and checks out everything you do and say. So to knock him off. And, you know, you're free. Now I own the world. I mean, I can write about anything. To anyone, for anyone. I don't have to have this white judgmental eye checking me, editing me, approving of me. Yeah, yeah. I don't mean that there were no narratives that slave women told, and there was no information about them. I mean, it wasn't the narrative in literature. My effort in saying Beloved to do that, to talk about a woman who had to make some choices about slavery, about motherhood, about love, about parenting. That had nothing to do with being a victim. A real woman, a historical figure, as a matter of fact, who was anything but a victim. This is a woman who said, these children are mine.
I can do with them what I want.
When Toni Morrison published Beloved, it was an extraordinary turning point in the history of this country, and I would say the history of the world, because she urged us to imagine people who were slaves as human beings, individuals with subjectivity, who also loved, who also had imaginations, even as they were subjected to the most horrendous modes of repression. We can never think about slavery in the same way.
So those two wonderful clips. When I saw this documentary at Sundance a couple of years ago, that notion of the white gaze, she even goes into some books that, that influenced me so much, was Invisible Man. But she says, invisible man, invisible to who? So coming from that place where we're speaking from a gaze that is instructed upon us, and she had made the decision consciously. She didn't realize she wasn't allowed to speak from her own perspective. And then when she found out she wasn't allowed to, she said, well, I'm gonna forget all that. I'm gonna go ahead and dismiss all that. And as you see in the clip, she says, she was free. And then we go into the clip, Beloved. And I remember reading that book and thinking, it's the first time that slaves were humanized in my life. And so my ancestors came alive. And it was a very powerful book. And it's one I cried and cried. And I probably read it twice. And I think I probably read it a few times, but I probably read it twice, like hit the back page, turned it back over, and soon after picked it right back up and read through it again. Because it humanized me, because it humanized my ancestors, because it made my grandfathers and my grandmothers and my cousins and my great aunts and uncles alive. I then got to recognize them as human beings. And therefore, if they were human beings, they weren't slaves, they were enslaved. They were taken, they were kidnapped, they were abused. And it related to my life of the abuses that I would see in my life to come, and the abuses that I would see that I was reflecting on in that moment too. So when we stop to think about that gaze and that ability for her to speak from, and I think some of you have reflected on that, to speak from her own power, her own perspective. The question for me is then, and I want to remind everybody really quickly to be looking ahead and be ready to put in those comments what a world that embraces Blackness looks like to you. And this is a good time for you to maybe start really thinking about what you're going to type down. So my question for y'all then is, how do we humanize each other? How do we continue that practice of humanizing each other? How do we express and live from our own locus of power? And by all means, reflect on what comes up for you specifically in these two clips. Let's start with Karen.
Thank you. I think, and refer back to both what Ashley and Miss Betty said earlier, right? The best way to begin humanizing ourselves is through education. There's this clip of, I don't know who this dad is, but he's phenomenal. And he teaches his son, his son is all over the news, and it's like a internet sensation. But he teaches his son Black history, financial history, and quizzes him. He does little like quiz videos. And he does that to make sure that he knows how to exist in a world that doesn't, that currently doesn't value his existence or doesn't humanize his existence, right? And he does that also to educate him and empower him and make him feel like wherever space his son walks into, he will feel like he has a right to be there. You know, Miss Betty talked about that earlier, right? Like, hey, I did this with my kiddos, you know, and my parents did the same for me. They wanted to make sure that I learned Black history, you know, not just in the United States when I was growing up here, but also the one about Dominican Republic, and learned about the Black history all across Latin America and Africa because I needed to, because it was important. They made sure that even down to like, hey, you know, Europe is nice, but like maybe don't pick Europe. Like, really think about, why would you want to travel to Europe instead of all these other beautiful places which have rich cultures? And that opened up the conversation for me to understand that there is so much beauty and so much more that I need to learn about than just white civilizations, because that's what I was taught. And I think that's a really great way to start that that humanization within our own families. For me, it's just a constant reminder. There are lots, you know, in Utah, when I moved to Utah, like I said earlier, it was, oh my gosh, all of my like really pretty girlfriends are white and I don't look like them. And how would I fit into the mold of the dating pool here, right? And luckily I don't have that problem anymore. But it was more of a, okay, when I learned about myself, I knew that I was not going to be with somebody that was going to try to diminish my light and also push me to whitewash my light. That was going to clash with my identity. It was going to clash with my family. And so I made a very conscious decision to be with somebody that was going to welcome and love those attributes and love everything about me. And part of that was showing up in the dating pool like this. Is this threatening to you? If it is not, okay. Is tight clothing threatening to you? Is talking the way that I actually normally talk outside with my friends, you know, where the Bronx accent comes out, is that threatening to you? And if it is not, and you're willing also to have a conversation where you can deconstruct anti-Black principles that have been taught to you, then we can be together. Because everywhere that I exist, I will exist in my full presence. And so I need to be sure that I can be myself and be happy. And that's honestly what I tell everyone else to do. Be yourself, surround yourself with people that welcome you, and expect people to welcome you in your full self.
I wish there was some sort of ability for our audience and ourselves to applaud. I feel very inspired by that. So thank you. And I'm sure I speak for everybody here on this panel and for much of our audience that that is just, my heart is just like right now. So I think they call that the heart chakra or something like that. I'm a Virgo. I don't play those games. So Ashley, let's go with you, and then Betty Sawyer. So Ashley, go right ahead.
Yeah, man, beloved. Beloved is near and dear to my heart, but I love this conversation about humanizing ourselves, right? Like us picking up that work, and the way that Morrison did, and in other ways, right? The way that Karen does it, right? With making sure that there are spaces for Black folks and marginalized folks in corporate America, right? Making sure that that representation happens, making sure, like Miss Betty, that we hold representatives accountable to change school curriculums, right? Where Black babies can see themselves reflected in greatness. And I think that is incredibly important. Even Princesse, I see Princesse commenting, but seeing that in Black wellness and yoga spaces and meditation spaces, or in those spaces that Black people are represented and know that they are welcome, right? Because they have a sister there, they have their sister there, holding that space for them. I think it's so incredibly important that we infiltrate, I want to say infiltrate and take up space in these spaces, right? We cannot, I think it's important for us to have our own sacred spaces, right? Where we can just go and be us and be with each other and just be who we are. But it's also important for us to take up spaces at those tables, right? Take those seats and plop them down and say, well, I'm here, guess what? I'm here at your yoga studio. Guess what? I'm here in your office. Guess what? I'm here at your financial literacy seminar or whatever. And so now now you're going to have to speak to me and all my people, right? You can't ignore us. I also think it's incredibly important for us to affirm each other, recognize that Blackness is great inherently, right? And this is something that I think that I'm really, really passionate about, because we can't just how do I say this? I want to make sure that I'm choosing my words carefully, but also being understood. We can't love our cousins who go to Spelman and go on to work for IBM or Google or wherever the places are, more than we love our cousins who drink 40s and have gold teeth. I don't know, everybody's Blackness is great inherently. And I think that in order to humanize us, we have to uplift those same, we have to uplift those, the people over here, the same ways that we uplift the people over here, right? We all have to know that we are brilliant and beautiful and whole and Black, and that just because this person has made these choices or presents themselves in this way is that doesn't dehumanize them. That doesn't take away their value or their worth, right? Because as we know, and this is something that I went briefly to earlier, as we know, those aunties with the gold teeth and the cornrows, right, are the culture, right? They are the leaders of the culture. You have people in Paris Week copying those same styles, right? But still won't stand up and say that those Black lives matter, right? And so I think that we've got, Black folks have got to understand that, I want to say educational and capitalistic success are valuable and they're needed, and we're so proud of those folks. But we are also proud of those folks who didn't enter into higher education or who aren't on the board of these boards or these panels, or we love them too, and we see their beauty and we see their humanness and we see who they are, because they are also a reflection of who we are. And so I make it a point to tell all of my friends how proud of them I am, regardless of what they are doing or where they are or what they wear or how they speak. I make a point to tell their babies how proud of them I am, regardless of all of those things too. And so I think it's really important that even in Black spaces, we come together and realize that we're just a reflection of each other, and we are also we also share the same experience, right? To a certain extent, we're all trying to make it. We're all trying to survive in this capitalistic white supremacist framework, right? We're trying to liberate ourselves from it. And so I think it's important that we bring all of us along. And so, yeah, and the other thing I do is I holler at Black people, especially in Salt Lake City, Utah, right? Like, I need you to know that I see you. And I need you to know that not only do I see you, but I love you. I don't know you, but I love you, right? And so, like, down the street, you'll just hear me say, "You beautiful, sis. You beautiful, bro. I love you, bro. I love you, sis. Yes, auntie, I love you." You know? And I make a point to do, I go out of my way to do, I will yell it out of my car. I will embarrass you in the aisles at the supermarket, but you are going to know that you are seen and that your existence isn't washed away or overlooked.
Oh, I love this panel. We could do this all night. I don't know if we'd hold all the audience, but I'm sure some people would stick around. We always like, on Changing the Narrative, we like to look at things in a light that we can aspire ourselves to, aspire our community to. And it's always important to have an imagination and to use our imagination, because that is really the driving force. As we know, one of the most famous speeches in the world, in this country even, is "I have a dream." And so we want to before we go to audience questions, and we also want our audience to be imagining too. So here's what we are going to imagine before we are done tonight. We're going to imagine a world that embraces anti-Blackness in the same way that we embrace St. Patty's Day or some of the many things that we really celebrate about so many beautiful cultures in this world. Blackness is a wonderful, wonderful culture, and Blackness throughout the Americas created an entirely different and new kind of culture in the absence of our being able to really tie ourselves to our African heritage, even though we are beautifully African too. So when we talk about Blackness, I want us to imagine Blackness and then imagine a world that embraces Blackness. So wait a minute, Betty, did we talk with you on the humanizing each? Oh my Lord.
That's okay. Do me like that. That's all right. We'll talk.
No. Let me pose that question. I am so sorry to the audience and you. Whoa, we can't let this night go without that. Oh, I jumped ahead. Okay. So the question was, how do we humanize each other? How do we express and live our own from our own locus of power? And by all means, also reflect on what came up for you in these clips, these last two clips that we played. Oh boy.
My sisters answered it. You know, as I was sitting there, my first thought was one of Toni Morrison's quotes about freeing yourself is one thing, but being able to claim ownership of that free self is another. And that's where we are. You know, we can talk freedom all the time, but until we embrace that and use that and find the power in that, you know, we will not reach our full potential. We won't be able to help others reach theirs. And the other thing I thought about was, and the sisters shared, I see you. That's what I do as well. I worked at the U of U and at Weber State now. And one of the things that would always kind of get to me, and we only have a handful of Black students as it is, and they would just walk by each other and not even look at each other, say hello. And so I grab them up and say, excuse me, did I not do my hair today? Because you didn't even say anything. What's wrong? And they were like, huh, you know, but I would make them stop and see each other. You know, we're in this Utah, environment. So we kind of get like everybody else, nonchalant, like we're going to see somebody all the time. We know we're not seeing everybody all the time. So when we come together, when you pass by me, I expect you to acknowledge me. I expect you to look me in my eye. And if you don't do it, I'm going to do it to you. I would even go as far as grab the Black guys from one table and take them to the group of Black girls at the other table. They haven't even talked to each other. It's like, What's wrong with y'all? Y'all don't, okay, you complain about the brothers not talking to you. Y'all better be bold, because them other folk will walk over there, okay? While you sit up here thinking about it, they will be there with a phone number and everything else. So let's get up, introduce yourselves, okay? Let's be real with each other. Let's see each other and embrace each other. As I have 4 sons, they're all grown and married now, but we laugh at some of our old pictures because it was almost like renting my sons out. You know, there were no Black guys for all of these beautiful Black girls to go to prom with or go to dance with. And so all of my sons may have 4 or 5 different prom pictures where they went in Ogden and Salt Lake and Layton. And they were like, Mom, I said, look, you going, because she needs to go to her prom and she needs somebody to go with her, and you're going to go with her. Okay. And that's the end of that. So we have all of these pictures where, like I said, every year they were going to 3 or 4 different proms all over town. So, but that's what we have to do. I see you, I embrace you, I recognize you, I value you. And that was a part of my home. Everyone was welcome in my home. My home now is the same way. We're called the Kool-Aid House. For years, I lived right by the high school. So on their way home, everybody ended up at my place, and they knew they could get something to eat. You know, they could hang out in a safe place. And so that's the work that we still have to promote among each other, that just take a moment and acknowledge, I see you, I love you. And like you said, Ashley, you're beautiful, you know, all of those things. And that'll help us, I think, come together when it's time to do the difficult work that we have to do, because the work is difficult and we all get tired of it. You know, if I could turn it off and take a vacation, I would. But every time I say I'm going to take a vacation, something happens and I have to be back on the front line again. And so it's important that we lift each other up and embrace each other and just recognize each other for who we are and the power that we have within us and the beauty that we have within us.
Wow, that's powerful. And 3 things here, Miss Betty. 1, I was a shy kid, so I wish she was my mother, because I would have had a lot of prom dates. 2, I just got a message from somebody and they want to know if you can set them up with somebody. So now you're playing matchmaker here on the show. And then 3, folks used to do that back in the day. I'm a little older than I look. I know I look only like I'm 20 something, but I'm a little older than that. I'm quite a bit older than that, actually. And we used to do that all the time. You never walked out the door and walked past a Black person and not acknowledge that they were there. It didn't matter if they was across the street. You said hello. You was waving or doing whatever you needed to do to acknowledge each other. Isn't that true? Okay, so now let's move to this portion, and I've already explained it. So I'm going to leave y'all with being able to. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but how do we? My friend just messaged me back, so she's really serious about this. She wants you to set her up. So So let's before we go to some of the comments from our and we want to hear from the audience too. So please put in the comments now. Describe a world that embraces Blackness, and let's go back to Karen on this one.
Thank you, Billy. That still happens, by the way. We still say hi to, I'm probably the youngest one on the chat. I'm 27, but, or maybe there's somebody younger, I don't know. But I still do that, and I love it because, a lot of my folks, when I used to work with the homeless population, they would always feel like they were embraced and they were seen. And so that's why we have to do that. To answer your question, a world that embraces Blackness, I think it goes back, like if I could, in an ideal world, it would be something where, if I think about like influencing, it would be a world in which people wouldn't steal the traits of other people, claim them as their own, and profit off of it. It would be a world in which Black women, Black men, and Black gender nonconforming and trans folk would be able to exist freely in corporate spaces, speak their mind, share their ideas, and actually receive credit for those ideas and be compensated for those ideas. It would be a world in which Black people's consulting efforts would not be expected to be cheap, but they would be paid full price for the work, the extensive work and knowledge that they have. That is essentially the hope, and I think that that's, in part what we're working towards, both in and out of corporate spaces, is for people to be able to accept people, compensate them for that, and also see that person's knowledge is valuable, and both not just their education. I wish there was, the world that I envision is one where I don't have to back up my experience with 10,000 different bullet points of other people's experiences, plus 15 books that showcase this, and 50 data points about, why they need to value my experience, value my ideas, and compensate me, right? And I know that that's the experience for a lot of folks, especially within corporate spaces, whether they're an entrepreneur, whether they're a politician or a lobbyist, or in law or in healthcare, wherever you are, that is the world that I want to see. One where we are able to come to the table, say something, be heard, listened to, valued, and actually have other people reply equally to how they treat our white counterparts.
Miss Betty, can we go with you next?
This one is difficult. And, I thought about that philosophical, what I would like to see, then the humanistic part of what I like to see. And what I just thought about was a world and a space that was like the dinner table, okay, where everyone could enter equally, equitably, be accepted where they are, valued, respected, all of those things. And a part of getting there, and I will get a little political here, is about, one, admitting to the big lie, set the record straight once and for all, repenting of the harm, atrocities, or horrors that came along with this big lie, reconcile, get some healing, and reparations. I hear people when we talk about reparations say, "Oh, don't give me." No, reparate me, okay? You cannot have yours. I'll take yours and help build this world that we want, okay? Everyone else receive reparations for some of those harms. As a Black community, we receive nothing. And we can talk about all of those other things, but we know behind all of this is that political, it's about economics and all of that. And if we don't address economics, all of the other things that we hope to have, we hope to see, we hope to do, because this power structure only recognizes that. Unfortunately, we're in a capitalistic society. Robert Anderson, Claude Anderson, he's an economist, been out in the movement a long time. He talks about, even with politics, he said, look, Democrat, Republican Party, don't matter. Get you some money, buy a politician, tell them what you want them to do. If they don't, fire them and go hire you somebody else. So we could look at this great thing, but unless we deal with the economics and us getting there so that we can do the things for ourselves that we're hoping other people will do. Thank you.
Wonderful. Ashley.
You know, this question is a little bit tough for me because I feel like I'm so like in the work, you know, like I'm so in the now, like this is what we have to do. Like that sometimes it is hard for me to fully imagine, like to allow myself to completely indulge in that vision. Because when I do, my brain is like, okay, but yeah, that's great, but we're not there yet. So here's what we got to do, like to get there, you know? But for me, one of the ways is I totally echo and agree with Miss Petty here as well in terms of like reparations, and that like the admitting to the lie and then repenting for that lie and like showing up also, as Karen said, like with the moolah, right? Because as we know, money talks, and Black folks have been barred from financial and economic access since like the inception of this country, right? Really the inception of the westernized world. But another way I think is, and it kind of like pinged in my head, Miss Betty, when you were talking about the fact that every time you're like, I want to take a vacation, you can't take a vacation because the work continues, right? And so in my ideal version of the world where Blackness is appreciated and humanized and loved in totality would be a world where Black people, and especially Black women, who kind of carry the work on our backs always, are allowed to rest, right? Like I want to see a world where a Black person can literally just say no. Like, I don't have to do that today. I don't want to do that today. I don't need to write this think piece today, or I don't need to show up to your training, or you know what I mean? Like I can just rest. And I think that also ties back into my idea of what it means to humanize people. I'm friends with Asia and I'm friends with Frankie. And one thing that I know that those two beautiful Black women do so well for me, being like in community with them, is they check in with me and they say, how are you feeding you? How are you resting? How are you replenishing yourself, right? And so I imagine a world in my most wild imagination where Black folks can just rest, where we can put down the axe that we've carried for 500 some years, right? And just be, like, just exist. Like, how powerful is that, to be able to just sit here and say, I do not have to earn my keep. I do not have to prove to white supremacy that I'm worth it, or I don't have to prove to capitalism today that I'm worth it and valuable. I don't have to put in the system that I don't really receive anything from, right? Instead, I can just go on that vacation, Miss Betty. I can just laugh loud with my folks from the Bronx, like Karen, you know, like Michelda. I can be Black and beautiful and speak is it Creole? Like I can go back home to those beaches, right? Like I can do all of these things. Princess, I can sit and like I can meditate, or I can do that yoga flow without having it having to carry on my back so much implication and so much responsibility. And so that's the world that I'm working towards. I think that the ability to rest, which hasn't been afforded to us ever, is liberation, right? Like I was just talking to my partner about this. We were in Liberty Park, and I was like, damn, white people really know how to recreate, because they were like out here like fishing in the ponds and rollerblading and just laying out on the grass. I'm like, no care in the world. was like, really? I like, they really know how to do this because they've been afforded the opportunity to do this. When have Black folks ever been afforded this opportunity? Miss Betty said it, you know? I try to go on a vacation and I get a call, you know? like the work continues and there's no one else. Like, white folks aren't picking up the axe, so we have to do it, you know? And so that's the world I dream of. Thank you.
You know, Ashley, I've heard you talk a lot in other interviews about ancestral wisdom and that deep down at our roots with our people, we know how to take care of each other. And I feel like that would be having the freedom to take care of each other in the way that we know to take care of each other freely without risking getting bombed by the government or something would be a world that I would personally love to be in, that embraces Blackness. So, yeah.
All right. This has been honestly so uplifting, and I hope that our audience felt the same way. We had quite a few people that commented, and I'd share some of those with you. Michelda George said, "Economics boom," and many comments from Michelda. There's a gentleman by the name of Mel Roberts. He said, "Great panel, amen and amen. So proud." He had many comments. Bring all of us along. Yes, he agreed quite often with this panel. We have to embrace all of us. They are the ones who love you the hardest. And then also Princesse commented, this whole program is amazing. And we had one comment, which I'm trying to find right now. It was from Isabel D. Moral apathy is partially selective blindness and amnesia around what's supposedly do they, quote unquote, know. This couples with a lack of lexicon and grammar to speak as a white person, but about the subject. As the Morrison movie describes, she creates a language that starts this process. So thank you for that comment, Isabel. I'm going to turn the attention back over to Frankie Baines, and she's going to introduce our closing poet. But we want to tell everybody we appreciate you so much. And please, we're not quite done yet. If you have some more comments you want to throw in here, we would love to save those and put those up on the websites that we have with all of our partners. Laura Jones said, "Great panel." Frankie Baines, this is all for you.
Just thank you all. That was absolutely soul-filling, soul food. I just had goosebumps and the whole time. So thank you all for just sharing your thoughts. I want to thank Billy and Asia for doing such an amazing job on a panel, moderating the conversation. And Karen, Ashley, and Betty, thank you so much for sharing from your heart. Okay, just to wrap us up and give us something to go home to, we're going to have Princess DesRose share just some closing words. She's a Haitian American and South Floridian native with a love for travel, yoga, and wellness. Princess is a yoga therapist who holds a master's degree in integrative health and wellness. Princess's passion for whole body wellness initially began as a personal journey for her in living well mentally, physically, and emotionally every day of her life. This journey has led Princess to share her knowledge with others through teaching yoga, mindfulness meditation, and wellness classes. Princess believes that everyone needs a bit of water and light to help them on their path of blooming. Princess's favorite saying as she journeys on this road of life is to recognize there is someone or something greater than us all. And for her, she knows God is always in the details. Thanks, Princess.
I'm muted. Hi, thank you. Thank you, Frankie, for this opportunity. Thank you all so much on the panel, just for everything that was said and the collective healing that it brought. I want to share this piece this evening to offer more of that spirit of centering Blackness. My piece is called Black Joy. Black joy, basking in my light, holding space for myself, embracing the full spectrum of who I am and the seasons of whom I am becoming, allowing kindness to reign, but not to be confused with weakness, speaking my truth, showing my scars, elevating to my full potential, for I am my ancestors' protege. My Black joy is loud. My Black joy is unique. My Black joy is not ashamed, for my Black joy represents freedom and my Black joy represents pain. My Black joy is from a line of many women before and after me, for my Black joy is transcendent. And my Black joy illuminates beyond the breaths that I take in this earthly state. My Black joy is free, yet my Black joy is very revolutionary. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those beautiful, beautiful words. I'm so grateful to have had this moment to listen to you all reflect and to be filled with that message, to embrace my beauty, to embrace it collectively, to embrace the beauty of Blackness in our beautiful communities. So honored to have been able to do this. So honored to be able to have worked with you all to make this happen. This was a collaboration with the Utah Film Center, KRCL, and the Project Utah Conversations. This was such an amazing opportunity. I want to thank you all for being here tonight and joining in on the conversation. In the chat, please share your favorite takeaway from the conversation, and to keep it going, to keep the conversation going on social media, use the hashtag Black, Bold, Brilliant, Salt Lake City. We've done some powerful imagining and envisioning, and now we have nothing left to do but to step into it and make it a part of our daily practice, daily, hourly, minutely, secondly, just make it a part of our whole realities. Thank you all so much for joining in today. Okay, let me go ahead and check out the chat. I think there's going to be some good stuff in there. Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining in. Have a good night.